Good morning. Hello, everybody. This is the Forward Thinkers Talk series, and I'm very pleased to have today a distinguished guest, Professor Simon Johnson, the Ronald A. Kurtz Professor of Entrepreneurship at MIT Sloan School of Management, where he heads the Global Economics and Management Group. My name is Dr. Ivo Pezzuto. I'm a professor of economics and management and the founder of Ivo Pezzuto Forward Thinking Lab. So Simon, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. And in this episode of the lab, we would like to talk about your latest ideas and accomplishment and scholarly contributions on the topic of technological progress and prosperity. And I know that recently you have just published a new book with your MIT colleague, Daron Acemoglu, titled Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle of Technology and Prosperity. And we are very curious to learn more about it. Your idea between the link between the relationship between technological progress and prosperity. So please tell us something about that, about this book, about your research, recent research. Why do you think it is crucial to study this relationship over the course of history?
Well, Ivo, as you know, we live in a very innovative time where new ideas are coming at us at a very fast rate, maybe an increasing pace, including generative AI, but that's just one example. And so we thought we'd step back and take the long view, as long as we can in the data, coherently, and that's about 1,000 years in our assessment. So look at the last 1,000 years of innovation in what we might reasonably call the European tradition and the way that's impacted the world, and then use that as a lens through which we think about both what's coming today and also to the point of your lab, what could come tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's definitely very, very interesting insight. And why do you think that? How do you explain why institutions seem to have a crucial role in promoting technological progress and economic growth over the years, over centuries?
Well, economic and political institutions, Ivo, I think, based on this work, but also previous work I've done with Daron and with Jim Robinson and with others. Institutions really shape the incentives that we have. So there have been other societies that were innovative in various periods. China, obviously, for a long time. The Arab world, about 1,000 years ago, was really quite innovative. But in all of those cases, it didn't really go anywhere. It didn't take off, and that's probably because the ruling elite, the combination of the theocracy, the secular authority, and others with wealth and power didn't find it in their interest to encourage further innovation. Innovation, of course, is challenging to the existing social structure because you don't know who's going to end up on top, for example, when generative AI plays out fully. So if the elite doesn't want that, and if they have political rules that exclude people and economic institutions that either prevent the value from coming to the entrepreneurs or they expropriate them after they become potentially wealthy, that generally chokes off innovation. So that's the key piece that I think, first in Western Europe and then spreading around the world, really changed over the past 1,000 years.
That's very interesting indeed, very, very insightful. By the way, just to make you think about it, when I was organizing this interview, I actually asked generative AI what I should have asked you. So it was interesting for me to also to use the generative AI just to look at the potential they have and what they would suggest. But besides that, one thing I would like to ask you is, as you know, the history of economics, economic development, entrepreneurship, and innovation management, which you and Daron have studied thoroughly and researched at MIT, indicate that technological progress is a major determinant of growth and prosperity. Now, we know that from the theory Joseph Schumpeter of creative destruction and the theories of all the famous scholars on innovation and growth, like Robert Solow, Robert Gordon, Eric Bonjolfsson, Paul Romer, and Douglas North, and others, and yourself, of course, they seem to support the idea that R&D, high productivity levels, good quality education, higher education, skills development, capital accumulation, and diffused entrepreneurial cultures, and also institutions and policies have a great role in prosperity and technological development. And in particular, technology and intangible capital seem to be big drivers. Now, what is your take about this, your research? What are the determinants of sustainable growth and prosperity for economies, communities, and stakeholders? And most of all, also, as some scholars say, are we just in the early stage of the productivity J-curve for the big tech breakthrough innovation we have today, generative AI, or AI in general, machine learning, big data, and all the other stuff, quantum computing, or deep learning, is all about, or is not like that? Are we in the early stage, and we're going to see this productivity J-curve moving up in the next few years as the complementary innovation skills and processes will eventually upgrade over time?
Well, that's a great question, Ivo, with a lot in it. So let me take the last part first. I think it's very hard to tell, but the parallels that are drawn with electrification of factories, I think are quite compelling. Now, that was obviously, in retrospect, a massively transformative technology, but it did take decades to roll out because you had to build new factories and change the layout of production and so on. Now, what we're looking at with AI and machine learning may come somewhat faster, but I think it's also going to take time to deploy and time for people to figure out how to use it. So yes, there is a lot of potential, but to take the first part of your question, I think how we realize that potential is really critical, Ivo. It might be a technology that ends up in the hands of a few companies that are, fairly innovative, but we're not seeing the kind of big breakthroughs. And I think that would be the case if, and go back to your point about Schumpeter, if the incumbents grab all the advantages. Well, incumbents are big and somewhat slow. If, on the other hand, the technology tilts or can be tilted towards entrepreneurship, towards many new business models and lots of crazy, maybe initially, but then some of them will turn out to be fruitful ideas, then I think we may get something much better, Ivo, with the right safeguards. And we could also create a lot more good jobs, and we could also transform or address many problems such as climate change. So I think we're a little bit of a fork in the road, Ivo. And I think which fork we choose will actually also answer your question about how much we realize the potential of this technology.
So yeah, that's very, very good point, Simon. So would you say that the recent trend in the corporate world towards stakeholder capitalism, the one that Larry Fink from BlackRock was actually advocating in his letters, open letters to CEOs, and about the responsibility as social purpose for companies. And later on, even the Business Roundtable in 2019 was addressing the point that the more companies can demonstrate their purpose in generating value for customers, employees, society, and communities, the more the competitive they become. In the long run, they would generate more profit and share value. So, and the whole new era of benefit corporations, B Corp certification, that also have been spreading around with what we have today, very popular, the diffusion of social impact scores and the ESG ratings and accreditations, and also the firm sustainability reporting. So do you see this as signs of a paradigm shift in our society, our corporate world, where corporate are becoming much more social responsible, and they do understand they have a bigger role in society to make sure that there is a sustainable and inclusive growth?
Well, I think the discussion is a good one, Ivo, and I think for all the reasons you just gave. But let's think about generative AI, so we have OpenAI, which is in the hands of Microsoft. We have Anthropic, which is working very closely with Google. I mean, do those two, let's call them potential monopolists, have an interest in sharing the technology, getting it out as widely as possible, addressing problems for which there's no monetary return in the nonprofit sector, for example? Or are they going to be trying to get a maximum return for their shareholders because they're going to say, look, we deployed shareholder capital, we took risks, and so we want the return? I think that we're still in the phase where shareholder capitalism is predominant, Ivo, and I think it would be good to see if this new technology can take us in different directions, but we're only going to get there if we have a plurality of business models and a plurality of companies that can really access and use this technology. So yes, the ideas are out there, but I don't think the commercial corporate logic is yet compelling enough for us to say the paradigm has shifted.
So even the network organizations that we have today, or the fact that you have open innovation, more interconnected supply chains, and this wouldn't that try to have more digital platforms and all these stack systems with more integrated software as a service, infrastructure as a service, application as a service. This interconnected structure system, wouldn't that create more interdependence and more democratization to a certain extent of the different stakeholders involved?
Well, look, potentially, Ivo. I think you're asking the right question. But if you look at how companies actually operate, if you look at how they respond to commercial pressures, if you look at private equity, now private equity is a very controversial topic right now in the US because, if anything, they represent the epitome, the extreme version of shareholder capitalism, and very driven by their own profits and not caring much about social impact. I just don't think we are there yet, but let's not give up. And I don't want to be cynical. And I do think anytime you have a big transformative technology, there's lots of options, lots of choices. And that's what we emphasize in the book. There are many choices that we can and should make. And let's try and have those choices discussed, at least very broadly, and have a lot of eyes and ears on those, as opposed to leaving them to, a few existing incumbent tech titans.
Yeah. So going back to your book and your colleague Daron's new book, who are the players, the actors, the key, the key figures that you think could enable this change? We talk about depends how you deliver technology, depends who controls what, and in a way, if we are able to spread the benefits for the general goods, and who should and who can do this? What are the figures that you see that are in a position to enable this, make it an enabling environment, even for entrepreneurship, even for new business ventures and social changes and business changes. Now, one of the ideas of share value strategies, and the idea that you can have more inclusive and sustainable business models, that you can at the same time balance the profitability and shareholder value and all the benefits of for shareholders and capital, and at the same time deliver value for the greater good and for other stakeholders, employees, clients, and whatever. Now you can achieve both in that sense. Now, who are, based on your studies, who would be in the best position to bridge this thing, to allow that the latest technological innovations would be implemented in the interest of all the stakeholders and the communities and greater goods? Who could do that? Who would be the greatest gatekeepers of this process?
Right, absolutely, a great question again, Ivo. So people are starting to talk about there being a vertical stack of technologies, like we've seen in other industries, like around internet protocols, for example. And at the bottom of the stack would be the large language models, of which it would be better to have more and more competition. Right now, we see two front runners. If other either large companies or smaller companies with access to a lot of capital can compete on that base, that's probably going to be a good idea. And then there's a question of who can build what kinds of stacks on top of it. We see discussion about applications in healthcare, for example, that are really very interesting. There are other applications in particular business uses like customer care and so on. Presumably, there'll be some middleware in there, Ivo, which I don't think we've seen that clearly form. So it's the entrepreneurs and maybe some existing companies, but I think a lot of it will be new companies and new people coming in with ideas about how to build on the available large language models and how to adapt them appropriately with safeguards. Those are going to be, I think, the key people and the key people to be encouraged and facilitated in this process. Okay,
that sounds very good. And going to the back to what we were saying before about, I recall that, by the way, in your many experiences, long professional career, you have a lot of expertise, a lot of very important roles. Besides being the professor at MIT for entrepreneurship and economics, you've been also the chief economist at the IMF. You are already the co-chair of the CFA Institute for Systemic Risk Council, and you are on the board of Fannie Mae, besides other things, including in the past Peterson Institute for Economics, International Economics, and of course also the Congressional Budget Office in the United States. Now, I want to switch back to another topic which is related, which is a little bit the macro side. Since you have been at the IMF, what do you see? What's your take on the latest outlook by the IMF World Economic Outlook April 2023 about multiple fragilities they still see around, in at least in some baseline or worst case scenario, about hard landing in the advanced economies, rising interest rates, inflation, which is still a challenge in many ways, and also these pressures for rising protectionism, deglobalizations, and so on. So we've seen a number of challenges, including the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in US, and the Net Zero Industry Act in Europe, and other pressures that they look a little bit like protectionist on both sides, but at the same time they're very exciting and encouraging because they lead to more investments in infrastructure and changes in green economy and digital. So this potential fragilities to financial fiscal stability on one side, and the other side, the excitement of fighting climate change with new policy. So where are we now? Are we taking the risk of a hard landing scenario, or are we in a very exciting moment of digital and energy transformation business models with some geopolitical challenges, but also with inherent fragilities like the ones we've recently seen in US with the banking problems, a couple of banks, Silicon Valley Bank and others. So what would be a way to achieve financial and price stability and maximizing growth potential and prosperity, while also maintaining a fiscal stance and protection over the more vulnerable countries and situations?
Well, again, that's a big question. Ivo, I think I'd say three things in response. First of all, the risks of a hard landing are very serious and not to be understated, partly because we've got some issues in the banking sector in the US that you just already mentioned, but also I would say the debate and discussion around the US debt limit. Now, sometimes people think this is a little esoteric and a marginal issue. It's not. It's really quite central, because there's a group of Republican members of the House of Representatives who are very far to the right. Let's call them the hard right, and they're completely obsessed with the idea of breaking down the government and crashing the role of the federal government. So, just given the way the electoral politics and the way the Capitol works, so that the Senate and the House, these people, it's a very few people, tiny minority with a huge amount of power at this moment. So that's really, really dangerous, and that could derail everything in the US and the global economy. So let's be very honest about that. The second point is, of course, you're right that there's another digital transformation coming. That is the promise of generative AI, building on on almost 4 decades of digital transformation so far. Now, those benefits have been not widely shared. We've seen a big widening of income inequality since 1980 in the United States and in other industrialized countries, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's ways to deploy the technology, develop the technology, push the technology in ways to be more inclusive, and I think that's a big opportunity. But the third question or piece embedded in your question is the most difficult, if anything, Ivo, which is, what about the rest of the world? Right. So we see technology being developed in the AI in the US and in China, not, I'm afraid, Europe at the moment, but maybe they can catch up. There is also a big push, as you mentioned, to intensify domestic technology development and deployment with a view to creating more jobs in the US. I don't think that's a protectionist measure or an anti-globalization measure, but it is trying to change exactly what happens where, including where the good jobs appear because of the lack of shared prosperity over 4 decades. Now, what about the rest of the world? How do they participate? How do they get what they want? Do they control their data? Are they just ships that are buffeted by a big sea, or can they have a seat at the table? That question remains largely unaddressed so far, Ivo, and I think it's super important because you may end up with a lot of what's so-called previously known as inappropriate technology. So technology that's might be good for the US, but might be quite bad for a low-income country because of the kinds of jobs it destroys and the kinds of jobs that it creates. We have seen some episodes of this in the past. This could be a big one. And I think this discussion is really quite urgent to advance and to figure out how to make sure that lower, middle, and lower income countries don't get adversely affected by this next technological wave.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And by the way, I was wondering, now that you mentioned this thing about the fragmentation in different countries, progressing on this thing. So do you think that these geopolitical tensions, and in particular what we see now, geoeconomic fragmentation, like reshoring, friendshoring in the US decoupling from China, and ban on a high-end semiconductor trade with China, and other things like this, would they change the geography of, and economics of the global economic landscape, where we see winners and losers, at least in the short term, like Indonesia, India, Vietnam, be coming out stronger with friendshoring initiatives, and others, US bringing back some of the productions, which is some of the things very exciting. Also, Europe working initiatives for the green technology, renewable energy. So we've seen, the Euro Net Zero Industry Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and other initiatives. They might help strike a balance between reducing excessive dependence on foreign countries for supply chains, for geopolitical risk, but also they might, try to avoid global fragmentation. And we've seen many key figures very vocal on this thing lately, on the risks for undermining global growth and prosperity due to this economic fragmentation that's growing and that might be challenging in one way or another. In a globalized world markets, this decoupling might also hurt innovation.
Well, I do think that the geopolitics have shifted, Ivo. I do think that the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia was something of a watershed, because first of all, people began to realize that European purchases of energy from Russia were primarily paying for the war in Ukraine, which was absolutely abhorrent, and Europe has made big steps to switch away from that. But Russia continues to generate a huge amount of money from its oil sales in particular. And secondly, China overstepped some boundaries of reasonable behavior in its support of Russia. Now, ostensibly, China is not supplying military material to Russia, but if you look at the exports of China to countries that are close to Russia, like Belarus, perhaps also Kazakhstan, these have soared. Okay, and this is not domestic consumption of Chinese goods in Belarus, it's transshipment into Russia. And I think China has gone so far now that unfortunately this is a big trouble spot. And why should purchases by the United States and by the West of Chinese goods be allowed to continue to finance essentially the Russian regime, which is killing innocent civilians in Europe? Right, Ukraine is an important part of Europe historically and politically. Absolutely. And I think that so now, as you say, friendshoring is going to be a very big issue. Friendshoring, and that is a massive shift, as you already mentioned. The countries that might gain from that, India, Indonesia would be two of the most obvious ones. Vietnam also, and I think China has some very big choices because China could buy all of Russia's energy exports, but Russia can't buy all of China's manufactured exports. Russia is too small an economy. So there's going to be some very tough decisions ahead, Ivo. I do think, though, to your broader question and broader interest, this is still a moment of technological innovation, opportunity, entrepreneurship. And to what extent that involves China remains to be seen. They may go do their own thing, and they're entitled to do that. But I think there's a key issue would be what's the cooperation between the US and Europe. I don't think we want Europe to be left behind. I think everyone should want Europe to participate in this. The European juggernaut moves a little slowly sometimes, but I really hope that they can participate in the whole friendshoring set of activities, and that could play out in many good ways. So it's a little bit of a return to the Cold War, but on slightly different lines. I think also surveillance, Ivo, is going to be a big delineator. Some countries will have surveillance using AI with a lot of safeguards. Some will not have the safeguards. I think the second group will be authoritarian regimes, and they can develop their own technology. It's available to them, and they've already pushed it. But I think all of the Western democratic countries, all the countries coming from this European tradition of invention and better institutions and protection of human rights, all of those countries should have a lot of guardrails and safeguards around surveillance.
Good. No, thank you. This is very insightful. Going back for a moment to your expertise as professor at MIT of entrepreneurship, and based on the observatory that you have there, privileged ones with a great overview of what's going on in the most advanced tech market. What are, according to you, the key skills and capabilities, organizational practice, cultures, and that you see moving forward that might be interesting for entrepreneurs today, for business people, for startups, for business ventures? What do you see on in the outlook now? What's going on in terms of capabilities and skills that you might want to suggest might represent an important thing? We've seen pros and cons of technology with progress and the risks, but also what are the opportunities for firms on this side moving forward, especially from a context which technology can be very advanced.
Well, we've had a course at MIT for nearly 25 years that I co-founded called Global Entrepreneurship Lab. And we send students between 80 and 160 students a year around the world to work with startup companies. And I would say 25 years ago, Ivo, the question was fast catching up, looking at what's available in the US on the internet technologies, right? And trying to emulate and catch up and be the next. And then, of course, there was a phase where it was being the local Uber or the local DoorDash. But following the business model. I think it's changed now, Ivo. I think now, because distance has really disappeared, cultural distance, business model distance, as well as communication distance, I think the issue now is tailoring innovation to the local market. So I think it's good, right, in the sense that you're not copying other people. It's also pressure because you've got to be original in lots of different markets. But the advantage is that local entrepreneurs will typically understand the obstacles, the problems to be solved, and the pain points of the local consumers better than a multinational will. So I think that this is a great opportunity for domestic entrepreneurs. They do need to plug into the world and see what's out there, and they need to say, the successful ones are saying, okay, of this menu of pieces of business models and technologies that we see out there, what's the piece that's going to work for Indonesia or India or Brazil? Right. So there's some mix and match, but there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of pushing the frontier of technology in what we used to call frontier markets. I think that's a very important and new element in recent years.
And by the way, you were talking about China before. When we think of China, we see that China has done the leapfrogging, in the sense that China has become very digitalized over the decades as an economic superpower. So they have this massive organizations like Tencent, Alibaba in financial, and other big players. And basically the country has done this leapfrogging that they've really done big jump in technology. Everything is digital. You pay everything digital. Everything is fintech digital in China. And so you have these digital wallets and everything for payments. And to a certain extent, the interesting stuff to me is almost that what you said is correct. There was a catch-up economic mode, and there was the cutting edge, which was more like the US. Now, when we think about digital economics, and the digital payments, the digital finance, whatever, to a certain extent, we've seen some of these emerging markets. I'm thinking about Nigeria more recently and others in Asia, including China, which have been somehow, leapfrogging. And looks to me, at least, almost like the rest of the world actually it's taking these countries, some of these emerging markets, as an example for advanced widespread digitalization in adopting some business model. I'm thinking in my head right now, things like, if I remember correctly, I read a few days ago about the net, the different business model, like Twitter is thinking about becoming payment device, like Tencent has done that for a while with the WeChat, or other applications like that. So like with the things we see Twitter, and now we see the same thing other companies are thinking about that solution. The fact of we recently saw Apple trying to become more engaged with payments with the bank, in addition to Apple Cards, in addition to the partnership with Goldman Sachs for banking account. So it's almost like, yes, there is a catch up, but I see that some emerging markets are way ahead in digital, and somehow in the West, we are almost learning from these emerging markets lately. Is that true, or is just my perception?
I think there's an element of that, Ivo, but I think the idea of leapfrogging, which is very interesting, suggests there's one linear path for technology development in telecommunications, for example. The classic example, which I think is true, is that the lower income countries jump to mobile faster than some other developed countries because they didn't have very good fixed line technology. But I think in general, there isn't a linear path. There's multiple paths, and you should choose that you make choices, and hopefully you make choices appropriately based on local conditions of which path to be on. So Apple Pay is a good example. I don't think Apple wants to become a bank, which that comes with a lot of regulation in the US, and it may not also want to be a credit card company rivaling MasterCard or Visa. It wants to be an overlay on top of existing rails. And I think that's actually quite smart for the US. In other countries, like China, it's obviously played out very, very differently. And Twitter is an interesting example. Whether Elon Musk will be able to pull off that or any of his other ambitions remains to be seen. I would be somewhat skeptical because, again, a lot of regulatory barriers to go through. We try to be very careful about who gets to do key sensitive financial transactions in the US, and not exactly Mr. Musk's style at the moment. So I think that the multiple paths forward, I would say, Ivo, multiple paths, find your own path. But you're absolutely right that there are many models now. It's not just I should look at the US or look at France or look at Italy and decide which of their technology I want. No, you can look all around the world and say, I see a piece in this lower income country. I see a piece in Turkey. I see a piece in the United States. Let me mix and match it for my environment. So that's a pretty interesting new problem or new approach.
Yeah, that's the power of digital and open innovation. Right. That's globally. Yeah. Now you have people in many different parts of the world, and connecting to this point, I think that so you don't see the two words of finance and tech or fintech or tech fin becoming more concentrated and more converging to big players that tend to be sort of comprehensive financial institutions, and also tech giant offering a full array of fintech solutions.
In the United States and in Europe, finance is highly regulated. The tech sector is not, as you'll have noticed. And the last thing the tech sector wants, including big tech, is the kind of regulation that banks have. So I think that will keep them apart. But you're right, Ivo, that if you just take a commercial logic, or if you take a different regulatory environment, that you could see that AI could become the basis for some quite interesting financial services. So I'm not saying there's an inherent divergence in technology. I'm saying it's the outcome of a particular set of institutions and regulations in the United States. And personally, I think finance should stay heavily regulated because we can see already the problems that happen when you just back off a little bit. That's what we're encountering right now in the US. Whether big tech, just on its own merits, will escape regulation remains to be seen. But right now, they don't want to become like banking.
That's very good. And going back to your book and your studies, since what we just saying, technology is a big enabler of prosperity and growth, and can connect with other elements we talked about, the processes and capabilities and skills and complementary innovation will determine and institutions what will be. Do you think that perhaps since the future it's very much driven by capital intensive and service intensive and digital platform intensive data and knowledge, it's becoming more and more the true gold of the future? Don't you think that one of the elements why today tech companies are very interested in some of these business models, including finance, fintech, would be data oriented things? In other words, if I sell you an iPhone, if I sell you, a computer or something, I sell it and then you keep it for a couple of years, But if I sell you a payment system, there is a transaction going on every day. Your payments, and that means data, and I collect more data on you, and it's every day. So you have a much deeper insight. You think about going back to Apple when they bought the fintech company from England to do credit scoring, and that developing their skills inside. Companies, the ability to do financial transaction allows you also to have, or like watching a movie on Netflix or whatever. That's daily transaction and daily data you can trace, you can track on users to provide better customer service, a better profiling, and better marketing activity.
Well, there's an expression people use quite often that right now they say data is the new oil. I don't agree with that. I think data is oil plus railways plus atomic power, right? So it's everything coming at us all at once. And in all of those instances, regulation and managing what was allowed or not allowed was a huge issue. Some more successful than others, of course. And I think we need to find an updated version where we prevent bad outcomes or negative spillovers, but we allow the entrepreneurship and the innovation to continue, Ivo. So I think this is the regulatory question of today. And of course, who owns the data is key. So what data is free, or quote unquote free, because I think these large language models actually steal quite a lot of the data or access stolen data in their training, which is a problem. And then who owns existing data like financial transactions? So banks or other financial transaction processes have proprietary data. They're not going to give that up easily to somebody else's large language models. What are the partnerships that are going to evolve where if you own the data and you bring the data, what can you get from the AI companies? And that may be part of the vertical stack development that we were talking about, probably an important part of it.
And also, if you think about, we were talking about generative AI, training algorithms, and the ability of, sophisticated predictive models like deep learning, machine learning, and neural networks, and everything that goes with that. So the ability to turn this data into knowledge into innovation into better servicing the market, that will give you a competitive advantage to many of these players in creating innovative business models, or to get a deeper insight about consumers, and that would be really a turning point in the new competitive mode. That's my vision. So moving forward, connected devices, automating processes, self-driving cars, augmented reality, all the immersive things, all these things require a lot of data to be performing well. So don't you think that, about your research, that the speed of innovation, digital transformation we're having, which is massively great and fantastic, will create a massive opportunity, but may also create a bigger gap, generational gap, because such a speedy innovation will bring the distance from one financially and digitally savvy generation and the others, like 3-4 generations away, rather than just one in a short period of time.
Well, it might, Ivo, but on the other hand, if AI enables in a consumer-friendly way advice on how to set up your PC, advice on how to run your communications, advice on all other digital things, it might actually break down that barrier between generations, right? When you use autocorrect, when you type an email and it suggests the next few words, nobody thinks that's AI. They just think that's how software operates now. But of course, that is predictive software of the early AI form. Other advice on, as long as it's trustworthy advice, as long as it's advice that the advice providers are held accountable, and as long as it's in the best interest of the consumer, all of those could actually break down some of that generational gap and make technology more accessible to older people, actually more accessible to people who don't have a lot of education, Ivo. So that opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities about the returns to education and also who gets what kind of opportunity. So again, I think these are choices that we can make, and we wrote the book in part to encourage people to feel empowered and to feel that they should either innovate in that direction or push for innovation to solve whatever social problem they think is important.
Yeah, I tend to believe also that this generative AI. I've been working myself using ChatGPT in the last couple of months, and I've noticed the incredible power it has. And people that I know and students, they've all been practicing this stuff, even in the courses. They've seen there is an immense power of generating ideas, creativity, whatever, and it's really democratizing in the sense that we all use it, we are all starting to use it, and I see that incredible opportunities. In this sense, this seems to be an optimistic outlook on that side. So I think, and I perceive that you are also quite optimistic about it.
Look, I think there's a fork in the road, and the one fork we can be very optimistic, Ivo, which is the line that you and I would like to take. But I think we should also be aware that if this technology falls into the hands of a few people and they use it to manipulate, or they use it just primarily for surveillance or other things, we don't get all the good things. So I think encouraging entrepreneurship, encouraging innovation, saying, look, we can create all these things and let's imagine what they are. That is really very important right now, because you don't want this to become a technology that's trapped in the hands of just a very few people, because then you'll get what they want, not what the rest of us want, typically.
Yeah, we've seen some of the risks with crime, terrorism that can be used.
Social media, Ivo. We talk a lot about social media. I think initially everybody felt social media was like lots of fun and empowering, and people said the Arab Spring was made possible by Facebook. But now I think we see there's lots of negative spillover effects, both politically, ethnic tension, also the effect on teens and concerns about linkage to teen mental health. So we need to take these things seriously, and we need to push for better innovation in those constructive problem-solving directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. So yeah, well, thank you very much for your long interview, Simon. That was very, very appreciated, very, very special. You gave us a lot of very insightful contributions. Thanks for your time, and I really look forward to having you again, our guest. And congratulations again for your ideas, your new book with Daron Acemoglu, The Power and Progress, Our 1,000 Years Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity, which is definitely a very interesting reading and a must read. A final word, anything you want to add that I haven't asked yet about your book that you think might deserve to be said?
Well, I think we've talked about pretty much all the big themes, Ivo. I'd like to thank you for your work and encourage you to do more of it. I think pushing people to imagine better futures and saying, look, what are the human problems we really need to solve with technology, as opposed to saying, I think what traditionally some people say, which is, here's technology, here's what it's going to do, and here's how you should react to it. No, we should try to control technology and push it and drive the innovation. And that starts with imagination, or as we say in the book, vision. So the visions that we have are really important. And these need to be shared visions, obviously, to have impact, but they should be everybody's visions, not the visions of a few people who are already very, very rich. And I think that's what your work encourages, Ivo. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I thank you. And I have to say, when I look at the younger generation, my students, your students, and the people that we see, we witness by looking at them, people that have a different set of priorities. They have, like all of us, the desire to do well, to achieve, to embrace change, to become, grow into something that's successful for themselves. But they also have a very different commitment to society, to people, to the environment, to social issues, and even to help the world be a better world. So I think they are probably catching this message much better than we do, in the sense that they are naturally engaged on both business and other priorities. So in that sense, I think that is a very important point, which you just said, the fact that there is the desire to achieve something bigger than your own success, self-actualization, to do something good for the others as well. And I think these innovations can be an enabler in that sense. So I take your point that we need to think ourselves and future generations, how can we use technology and progress for the success and for a better future for all institutions. Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best, and please keep in touch. So we'll talk about this in the future, and all the best with your research and your new book.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.